But then, how are these corporate valuations based on selling junk to the populace that they brainwash through the advertising to buy, even though they're giving you a diametric opposite message where it's CO2? Wait, you're killing the planet. You buy two because they're on sale. Inflation in the U.S. will climb between 6 and 9% by year's end, said Steve Hanke, who served on Ronald Reagan's Council of Economic Advisors. Said the rapid growth in money supply, work fueling asset prices. But the negative side to this, the rise in inflation in 2021 has been caused 100% by growth of the money supply. When inflation spikes, commodities like gold, silver, lumber, real estate have historically surged. Learn how simple it is to add physical gold and silver to your portfolio ahead of the rise in inflation and predicted price rises. Patriot Gold Group has the no fee for life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold and silver, and you may be eligible for the no fee for life IRA. Call 1-800-356-4470 and get a free investor guide today. And the knowledge that Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs' top-rated gold IRA dealer 5 years in a row from 2016 until present. Click the link in the description box below for more information. And now on with the video. And welcome back for the second hour of Mini Ice Age Conversations. Thank you for joining. We're having a great conversation talking about the distractions, the availability of life itself, and the things that we've all become accustomed to, and where it might move from this point as we transition into something different and new ways of lives. I always find it so funny because I talk about effects of the sun driving our climate versus CO2 driving it. And through history, when you look at the rise and fall of civilizations, it's always on the sun cycles. And when you go further back, whether it be De Vries or Bray cycles or Gleisberg cycles, something longer than the 11.5-year average solar cycle from solar maximum to solar minimum, you have longer duration cycles that intertwine and eventually overloop on kind of a harmonic wave where you get several cycles overlapping, like we're coming into these next 3 years. On 2024 in October, we're going to have several multi-decade, multi-century, and multi-millennia cycles vibrating and overlapping even with the 11-year, 1-decade cycle. But think about that, because coming into that whole mind frame where I'm at, everybody is talking about CO2, it's global warming. But the same thing, if you watch TV, it's like, hey, there's 2 on sale right now on Amazon. Why don't you get 2? But it's the same corporate responsibility garbage that you're looking at every day of, oh, we're a sustainable company. But wait a second. You're the ones pushing all the advertising and all the trinkets of junk that people are buying it. Then you're complaining about CO2 warming the planet. And it's just a rinse and repeat, because let's say you watch a Super Bowl ad and everything's about buy this, get an extra one of this, get a new car. This whole thing about get a new car, how many car advertisements are on TV? And the same thing, like, don't get a car, it's CO2, it's warming. But then, how are these corporate valuations based on selling junk to the populace that they brainwash through the advertising to buy, even though they're giving you a diametric opposite message where it's CO2? Wait, you're killing the planet. You buy two because they're on sale. We're looking at the same thing, just in a real time sense here on any nightly program that you would watch on TV, if you do watch TV. The past is the future, the past is almost like, Planet of the Apes going down in the layers a little further back is our future.
It is a sci-fi, but that's what's funny. We're still trying to convince people that them living their normal lifestyle is not making climate change, and that climate change has constantly happened on cycles. But you can't tell some people that. They think you eat a steak and you fart, that you're evil. And that's kind of a joking way, but all of the programs meant to guilt trip the public into thinking that somehow they're responsible for what the sun does. That's another mass mind control psyop that the majority of people fall into, and they're determined to believe that. It's almost like, one of the first stages in taking over the world was to make everybody hate themselves. And what better way to do that than just tell you you're killing the planet? I can almost guarantee you that most individual people are not the ones destroying the planet, but instead it's these multi-billion-dollar corporations putting out genetic pollution, chemical pollution, deforestation. These are all topics that they'll never talk about, but they will talk about the climate warming. And, on top of what you were saying, what are they going to say? I mean, who are they going to have left to blame it on when everybody's dead? They won't. They'll just have these little orderly people that are used to a society where they take directions. You mentioned Planet of the Apes. They kind of lived in that society there and with the old one at the beginning. You know how they were all in the onesie suits and they said they killed everything on the planet, and that's why they made the apes in the first place. They wanted company.
You forgot the military in your list of naughty naughties. Like, see, that's one nobody wants us to touch with a 50-foot pole.
Yeah.
You got ships going 24/7. You got aircraft flying 24/7. You got manufacturing 24/7. You got an enormous amount of people moving around on road vehicles 24/7. And that thing never stops globally. All the militaries across the entire planet moving. If you were to cut that, you would reduce everything down into a fraction. You look at how much is put into keeping this global fear of war going and the actual production thereof and distribution of implements for that.
Yeah, don't forget about the oil. The oil got hacked. We got hacked. All of a sudden we're having hack problems. You know how convenient being hacked really is? Anytime there's an edict from the top, any companies can just say, well, we got hacked. Oops, sorry, nothing we can do about it. It's ransomware. You know what? We decided to embezzle, I don't know, $1 billion. We'll just pay it to ransomware. And then you see our government acting like things like this are up to the private company when normally they would be all up in there trying to control the situation because of it being considered a threat to national security if our companies are being hacked and ransomware, right? It was just, don't worry about it. It's because the economy's bad and there's problems getting you things. Every time I look up something like, the power shortage in Texas, I find out there was an executive order from the executive branch telling them to go ahead and turn it off and reduce the amount that they're going to need because we don't want to put a bad carbon footprint. Don't worry about it. Just turn off the energy. And they know the repercussions of doing this. And we talk about grid downs due to the sun. The most common grid down is government failure. And then you have to go back to what we were saying. It's not just a government. It's not just your government where you live in your country. It's a global governance. Who's running the global governance?
Well, the same people, and I want to go back to when you were talking about the Bolshevik Revolution and all the starvation. Word to anybody listening, the farm implements to grow the food was confiscated along with the seed supply. So they understood the farmers were smart. They went out and dug in the fields and hid a whole bunch of bags of seed everywhere. But what they did was they took away their ability to actually plant the seed and farm the seed. So as the army went door to door on the farms, and you got to think about how remote the farms were then compared to where it is now, like how much faster this could occur. Because let's step back half a century, even a full century. Like when you consider remote countryside, even 100 years ago, you're considering really incredible remote. But they were still able to go out there, the Soviet army, and find all these places that people were farming. And then the number one thing was confiscating the machinery. That's what caused the starvation. And then they put up the blockade zone around that, which did not allow export out or import in of seed or machinery. So they put up a giant zone where nobody could come in or out and just let everybody starve in there, which was such a sad thing. When we come into 2024 here, for those of you who follow the Adapt 2030 channel, this second magnetic field forming, July and August are the 2 months that it's going to be seeing some great effects as we swing past with our Earth into this magnetic coupling, which will be structurally sound through 2024. Jupiter's going to sweep past the Earth in its outer band, but once that does, we're going to be locked into that magnetic coupling all the way until 2024 of October. So there's going to be an enormous amount of earth cracks, earth slides, and rifting of the crust. So if you're already talking about hacks of like the Colonial Pipeline, this makes sense because maybe it was a practice run to see how long it would take before people would panic and shortages. But if you knew that the planetary alignments coming up were going to create a second magnetic field affecting the Earth's crust and our infrastructure, you would want to practice what a pipeline down situation would look like. So now we're into the real world scenarios using hacks to simulate what would happen in a real pipeline down, a real bridge down, a real railroad down because of Earth rifting effects. And how are we seeing it now? Non-deliverables happening across the entire world on a global level of non-delivery, non-production, shortages. Is that because it's shortages, or is it because of maybe they're planning into the future where those railroad tracks aren't working, those highways aren't working, those bridges are non-functional, and they're playing it out? How many things can be real life now? They're getting you used to shortages. Okay, that's the same thing that people are going to have to get used to in the food, the rationing times. Your availability and your accessibility to goods that you can purchase, limited. It's not available on Amazon, you can't buy it. It's not available in your store, you can't buy it. It's limited, you know? So how many real world scenarios can play out here? I'm talking about planetary effects magnetically affecting the Earth's crust and all the delivery systems being affected by that. Road, rail, bridge, pipeline, conduit, and when I say that, I mean like fiber optics. Ripped and shredded across the planet over the next 3 years, starting in July and August. And that whole landslide off of West Africa that buried all those cables, that's a perfect example. You can't tell me this is all playing out in real time right now. Come on, I can't believe it. I cannot believe it. Something else is going on. That's the distraction.
I don't think that people are ready for any of that stuff, especially railroad tracks and trucks not coming because of no gas. So when people really were panicking about things, also because it relates to like whenever, if you've ever been in a city when a hurricane's coming and you actually see how the last minute preparations are of the most of the public, and you see how fast products disappear. Pandemic happened, it was like a hurricane for the whole world. On one hand, you got to see how many people would just believe everything that they heard. And on the other hand, you got to see how many people would question what was going on. But more than that, you got to see what would happen with the commercialism that we have. And what I saw was pretty scary. If you remember, the stores were stopping selling seeds. You remember that? They told people that it was non-essential to buy seeds. And then they started, practicing other products, just shelving off the whole store. You remember all of that. And then at the same time, the only part that they let you go in 6 feet by 6 feet in there one at a time was into the food aisles. And we were joking at the time that it was reminiscent of the fall of the Soviet Union. But I think that was literally, I wasn't the only one watching. There were probably lots of think tanks sitting there analyzing every movement of the public and what they got them to do. So they realized, just like I did, that the public is completely unprepared. And when it happens, I'm going to say 90% of people are going to do a bunch of bad choices in just the first wave of things. And then we've talked ad nauseum about the other problems. There's other groups, diabetics, et cetera, that aren't going to be able to deal with not just the supplies not coming, but they can't even travel if things like this start happening. There's going to be nobody out repairing roads. If you've traveled down any highway in the US, in about a year, it starts falling apart and getting potholes, and then they're out there fixing it again. It's road work. I've never traveled on Interstate 40, for example, without a big stretch of it being under construction. So I can just imagine what would it be like if those people no longer went to work and fixed the roads or plowed the snow or any of these other things people take for granted.
See, and here's where I want to delve off into the ancient past, where so many buildings in Italy, it's incredibly difficult, even with today's cranes and pneumatic devices, to destroy the concrete made in Italy, say circa 500 to 2,000 years ago when they all used volcanic dust in the concrete mix because those shards or whatever shape they would take would interlock and interlace with each other. So my whole question has been, why would we not use the same building techniques that are nearly impossible to destroy today to create the roads that we have? Would we not use the same concrete mix of using volcanic dust to interlace everything that is in that lattice that creates the bond layer for the concrete that we would lay down, where it would be a one-time lay that you would literally hundreds of years in the future, they couldn't even break it up because it's so solid. Yet why do we continually, again, it comes back to that whole global, you're creating global warming. Yeah, well, you're running cement factories because you're putting substandard building materials on the roads, and you're running a bunch of asphalt using the detritus from the bottom of the barrel oil refinery. You know, once you take the naphtha off and you get into the different gasoline blends and you work your way down to the bottom tar layer, what are you going to do with that? Oh, we can't put it anywhere. So, we're going to make roads out of it. Dude, that's a great idea. People will pay us to get rid of our waste. Oh, how about volcanic dust for the concrete mix so we never need to repair another road ever again? Where would the oil company put all their bottom of the barrel garbage? Because when you crack a barrel of oil, you only get probably the 50% is what we consider liquids. Like the same thing, if you're going to, I'll go back into oil for a second here. You go over to, let's say, the Caspian Sea Basin. This might be a little, I'm going to weave this idea to you. When you go up to the Caspian Sea Basin, they have heavy sour crude, which means there's a huge amount of sulfur in it. So what they need to do is separate the sulfur out of what we understand like a liquid barrel of black oil. Because there's so much sulfur in it, they need it, and they got like Himalayan-sized mountains of this sulfur. You know, you get sweet crude somewhere coming out of like the Norwegian basin or something. That stuff, wow, you just nothing. It just goes right into the refineries. But you got heavy sour. You need to refine that before it even can go into a refinery. So what happens? All that sulfur is pulled out, but where do they put it? It's a waste product. So they haven't really learned how to, or at least in our society yet, come to this point where they can find sulfur and turn it into a product that can be blended into the landscape that's considered essential infrastructure, because sulfur, pretty soft stuff. You know, if you're looking at tar sands production too, you know, you go up into Alberta, what was that? They tried the same thing, because after the extraction of the tar, you know, they boil it in the hot water and they have all this detritus and waste out of that. In the beginning, the oil companies were like, dude, we're going to repave all your roads. But after the roads were, you know, 3 feet tall and people were skidding off the side of the roads because it was 3 feet tall and crashing because the roads were so perfect, they ran out of places to put it all. And then they had those big ass tailing ponds that went out, and there was hundreds of miles of pond of wastewater stuff destroying everything. So wait a second, the waste was the waste that you need to now. It's a substanding building material that's going to rift and crack anyway. It's almost like somebody knew these cycles and they put the society up to extract as much as they could for a wealth building or a carryover into the next society's steps or whatever that is into 2030 after we get through this planetary magnetic anomalies and earth rifts, cracks, until we get into 2030, 31, 32 before it ends and we start to go back to some normal growing seasons and earth stability again. Like there's an enormous amount of extraction of different types of gold, silver, platinum, palladium, and other wealth minerals at this last juncture up to now. But now it's all a fire sale. They don't care. Everything's being restructured, burnt to the ground for what? And where is all that going to and being held until the carryover and the restructuring of the next society with cryptocurrency and the faster way to do things and the energy movement in a faster way? Where's everything else that's being carried to the next world that's been manufactured at the sacrifice of this world?